So in the morning, Rinpoche will give the teachings on the Four Noble Truths, and then in the afternoon, Rinpoche will proceed with the teachings by giving you the Amitabha empowerment.
제 엔쇼베 덴바시딩엘 드린데 쇼베 직체 안디네 치루 칼라사네 셸라사네 디젤이야 데슈 엠 파동샤 안디네 제나도스 피아샤나.
So basically give the teachings this morning, then have lunch break, have a little break in between, and then thereafter 2 or 2:30 at some point then Rinpoche will proceed then with the initiation, with empowerment.
안데 페딩의 망고지기다 덴바시고 땡을 망고 거여를 생이기로 봤어.
So all of you having come here, you've probably heard a lot about the Four Noble Truths.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yeah. And then 덴바시고 코바삼도 마세베 야구 튕게 위해서.
So have you not just that you have some kind of sense of what it means, but have you also understood what it means? What the actual meaning is? Do you understand the Four Noble Truths?
다 덴바시게 남샤디 상계베 첼 첨바이나다 쇼제게 개칭부 차대요래.
So with regard to the Buddhist teachings, the Four Noble Truths are extremely important. Can you hear me clearly?
제 상계 좀 된게 최기 림보 망고 쇼지 송요래. 림보 송베 난게다 림보 컨데 송베이네야 덴바시디 자와체네 인디 띵려야 던 nembe 껬네 띵서버 담베스로 직차대요.
So the Buddha, he gave a lot of teachings, a lot of different levels of particular teachings, but the foundation of all those teachings are the Four Noble Truths. So whatever teaching the Buddha gave, it all fits into the Four Noble Truths. It always relates back to them.
제 따디네 녜려야 직 덴바시기 토네 마 제시 슈발라 녜려 상게 좀 되된게 직 중럽디 챔병이엘 직 슈나 루아 안디나마 직 상계기 덴바시기 초고 숭당레 엔드 좀 제시 준비 슈에인다.
So Geshe Rinpoche will now talk about what the Four Noble Truths are, but preceding that, Rinpoche will talk of the story of the Buddha, like how the Buddha came about and how then he proceeded once he became enlightened by teaching the Four Noble Truths.
상계 좀 되된 다 단단히 집에 지금 로니동 다 용라셰베나 다 로니동 앞에 학 승구요래 딱 상계 중배 뒤럽들이야 뒤즈들이야 숭당
I see. So with regard to the time of when Buddha Shakyamuni came to this world, there is some discrepancy, but usually it is accepted to be 2,500 years. That is a little bit more than 2,500 years ago.
제디 숭당 만라 거셰지 거셰기 안다 뒤럽 아주 단다 뒤럽 유석집으로 봐 뒤럽고 모습에 before the centuries 이거 뒤럽 before BC 아니 죽겨 인슈적 솜스갑려 생게 충분했어야다 안 거셰기 BC로 납겨 죽주래장 갑려 생게 충분했어야다 숭당 만라 어딘데 거셰시요래.
So the difference, why there's this discrepancy in terms of the date, is because when we look at, now it's the 21st century, so going back to the century, like the birth of Christ, so when the century started, and then before, so before Christ, so BC, some historians would say Buddha Shakyamuni was born around 623, versus others who would say it's around 565, around that time. So there is some disagreement with regard to the exact timing.
다 디체네 상계 좀 되는다. 뒤즈딘데질이야. 다 단다 체바이나 배유에게 사지 차대요래. 총서디 룸비네를 두스 총부로와.
So with regard to the place of birth, nowadays the place of birth where Buddha was born in the past is nowadays Nepal, and the name of the place is Lumbini.
캬즈 룸비네라 팽용이 망고 유기래.
Rinpoche is saying there must be many of you, probably many of you have been to Lumbini. Is that right?
네. 제 안상게 준비된 더 자외 쿠랑기다 총사 쿠류디 김산디 개비 김산한 총부래 Gebu Kimzan de ta Lumbinene pa test ta kilometer nishu sumju mero tinde chig chamli yö deng yogis ane saji chili ya dos che chung sa gi gebu chashabayina gebu yab gi tsen la ya sudu danas rwa yum maya maha maya chene koni gi sel chumburwa
Naji. So with regard to the place where the Buddha was born, it was Lumbini, and then about his actual home was about 20 to 30 kilometers away from Lumbini. His family was a royal family. His father was a king, so a royal family. He was born into a royal household. And so this particular place, his father being a king, 20, 30 kilometers away from Lumbini, with his father's name being Sudadana, and his mother's name being Mayadeva.
Mahamaya.
Mahamaya.
Mahamaya. Oh, yeah.
Sorry.
It's okay.
Mahamaya.
Yeah, it's okay. 제 롬비네를 통해야지 다 자베 상계기다 김장신 세네다 롬비네데 데스 킬로미터 망고 살려봐. 니네 롬비네를 통해야지 니마 loksol이야. 다 직주모이네자 간지제 술이야 부게베이네야 부게서디 아마기 난딜 파치네 부게우도아. 기능신기다 상계 충로유도 잠발라 아니 주모 그랑파 페네 그랑기다 나는 나는 페베 난갈이야 룸비니 균이 페인데 룸비니리아 또 스톰 치셔그래 주모기 아상계기 윰 룸비니네마 균이 페인데 다 룸비니데 사지 기부체네 디디 링가도 시레도 안 딜이야 슝녀도 시트 안 데니야수드 겸백업딜라 상계도 스톰
Naji. So the reason the Buddha was not born at home but in Lumbini, further away from his actual home, was that at that time it was customary for a woman, when she gave birth to her child, to not give birth in her husband's home, but rather to go home to her parents' place and then give birth there. So this is exactly what the mother of the Buddha did. She actually set off when she was about to give birth. She set off to go home, to go to her parents' home. And then while she was traveling to her home, at that time, suddenly she started giving birth, which was this place, Lumbini. She had just arrived in Lumbini, and it was a beautiful kind of park, a beautiful kind of garden. At that time, there was this garden, and this is where the Buddha was born.
Oh, 근데 다상게 좀 되는 게요. 수도다나 리아 세 모충버체네. 규릉부충다 세 모충버레. 다딘데 상게 좀 되는 기타 총윤도 다 개보이네 쉬우지기 가보충 쟤네 엔디네 상게 총니 니망아바딜이야. 다 크랑게야 개베 디발 라마스네 다딘데 장송딘데 요래. 봐. 쟤 엔디네 망고지수 루루체네. 엔 상게리아 총베 댐제체 엔 상게 세 춘주딜이야 민다야 댐제체레스.
Not it. So the Buddha's father, at the time of Buddha's birth, he was very pleased with the birth of his son, because for a long time his wife didn't give birth to his son, so they were awaiting the birth of a son. So therefore, after his birth, after the Buddha's birth, he was very pleased about this, and on the 5th day, 5 days after the Buddha was born, some rishis, some kind of ascetic spiritual practitioners, they were invited to the house to do some prayer ceremonies, to engage in some prayer ceremony, and to give a name to the newly born boy.
쟤는 장송 디가블이야 장송 디데 망고시 페네 페쟁아스 쇼레 콘스페 안 장송 소이다 상게 디데 슈누디 안 철 슝니 두스 제비나 안 베슈지게 다 나버타바스네다 퓨드 총지 쳐그래 안 게시 저와 경니 두스 나바이나 안데 배 개부 첨부 쇼직 차네 배 점블링 리아 왕규를 개부 덥심부 쳐그래 쟤네 그런 소이다 롱댄스네다 두스 쳐그래.
And there were quite a number of these rishis, as they're called, rishis, these spiritual practitioners, and it was around 5 of them. And so they gave a prophecy. They gave a prophecy to the king Suddhodana to tell him what was going to happen with his son. So he said, if these rishis, they gave the following prophecy. They said, if the Buddha were to engage in any kind of Dharma activities, he would be a great teacher. He would become an excellent teacher. On the other hand, if he were to engage in any kind of political activity, he would become a very powerful leader, like a world leader, a powerful figure in terms of politics.
And dine wish chanlaya, wish said chanlaya shunu tundrups chene, siddharthas chene, and to stop.
And so the name the Buddha was given at the time was Siddhartha.
Che di turn drubas, tunda di turn druba tinguerwa, Harasan ta se mochungni, gurung buchungni, talhan ta se shuna samne. Kaisana gave into sambalata Kurangi gave ta gigusine, gave ma kyongorwa, that is semen a kapucha yorwa, and se shuna sam. And Tedanyamdo Konzo Lungden, that the Kesi gave si kyongya in the Nabayan Hajangi, gave a top chimpuchagres, Chedin, to Sambala, that turned out drop songs, and the next channel Siddhartha to start.
So the meaning of Siddhartha, or in Tibetan, Junu Tundrup, it actually means, in particular, the latter part. In Tibetan, it's very obvious, where it means having accomplished the meaning, or having accomplished one's goal. So basically here this name was given because the king's goal has been accomplished in the sense that having waited for a son for so long, now with the king finally having a son, he was now able to pass on his regency to his son, so to administer his country, administer the place he was the king of. So for that reason, he was very pleased to have this particular son who could now take over and make sure that the king or the kingdom became even more powerful.
Antine sangeta shunudi ta dineya shunu tindrup ta lobjon naya ya kolong khansam shpen de ro ta kolong doing ge gu de ba pen de ta lobjon naya gozuni ta lobjon ta yegere ta ne yege loya tiya zi nyanga 대신도 rigbenne mongol lobjon naya chen so sawa mitras lobe gegen ro 탐제 신이 사와 밑으로 코란티에 롭좀 먹고 싶나 한다 리베톱 할레버 유도 롭좀 가르나 보이네 남산 캔네 아니 저기 개개인이네 러비아 매버선 러비아 조주요래 안테션도 다 류기제 베나 육샬로야레 제무제야레 다슈야레 다야베야레 텔라소베 아니 저기 제 르기네 탐제 공도 추네 한다 베 슈제기 렌다 차워지 차브레
나리 다세 So the Buddha proved to be, as he was raised, as he grew up, he proved to be an excellent student. So he received an excellent education. So at that time, the kind of education that was given to someone of his standing, such as learning to read and write, learning about astrology, poetry, different sciences, basically. So he received an education in administration and so forth. So he was totally trained, totally prepared for his future. And on top of that, he was also taught in kind of warrior techniques, in sportive events and so forth, horse riding, etc. So all that he was taught to him, arrow shooting and so forth. So his teachers, at some point, he became so efficient in his studies that his teachers were no longer able to teach him anything new. He became so efficient in anything. He was such an excellent and outstanding student.
얘네야 따상게 슈누튼로 콘 김장 차샤비나야 김장기 차네 벤조레 뉴버레 표준 속고시레 개비 김사레 대신도 크란 랑이리 이네야 신용기 차네 안타 얘기 틀로레 당기 슈버는 신기 따 리베네 탐제 나 다가는 신기 지 류기 차네레 베 지 제목 릭 dob기 릭 창물로 표준 속고시 요리들레 투기 나려야 지 디기 표준 속고 요 직다 요메베 디기 지 디기 템보 양타버지 연구메베 손한데 숙침부 연구요.
So therefore, at that time, Siddhartha, being such an excellent student, he also enjoyed great wealth. So he was born in a very wealthy home. Likewise, he had great qualities, such as his education was excellent. He had great knowledge and so forth. His body was very strong and handsome. He was excellent when it came to any kind of sportive activity. And nonetheless, with regard to happiness, with regard to a sense of happiness, lasting happiness, firm happiness, he felt there was something missing. He was not able to enjoy that kind of lasting and stable happiness.
전에 엔틴데지 인도 딱랑 투 직대보 매와 오네기 디게 지 카레나 삼베 소아디 양탑이 디게 카레나 삼베 소아 가서 디 투르야 천안데 숙심부 쇼이고 요래 디인데 잠발다 개보 좀 되는게 개보 여러와 가서 옆 개보 세상세 수도다나 시부지기 셈제 연구 요래 다 상게 니마 롱대 요번은 신기 당원에게 김빵네 당는 신기 지금 럽도 중요하다 최고 딘데질 패비나 아니베 개위 시스년데 답에 체루를 삼는 셈제 시부체네 안 디네 당는 신기 개보기 여기 게제트에서 럽된 쇼서 장송 혼솔래야 게제트네 다 가르치는 야고 요래스 다 가르치는 다 장송 속에 다 상게 좀 되네 갈라오래 다 즉 최려야 만져야게 탑실라 상게 툴이야 즉 trouble 요양했네 지 유노 채널에 다는 신기 다 자기행기 채널 표준 속을 써야 탑시 최고래 채널 근데 콘스 깨지 좀 버렸어
And so the Buddha, therefore, not really feeling happy, not really feeling satisfied and content. So in his mind, he felt like he was not really receiving the kind of happiness he was looking for. And there was a very strong feeling that arose as a result of that kind of discontentment. And Suddhodana at that time, observing this, being aware of this, he got very worried. He got very worried about the tendencies of his son. In the sense that he felt there may be the danger that his son would leave behind the householder's life and instead become a monastic, become a monk. So there was this worry he experienced. Why? Because he wanted to make sure that the royal lineage was continued by his son. And so his royal activities would have been hindered if his son had given up his household life. And so with this worry in mind, the father, he approached the rishis. He asked them for advice. What can I do that my son will not become a follower of the Dharma, will not engage in Dharma activities, but stay at home and continue his duties and remain in his wealthy home?
안테네 상겔이야 쇼누트룰이야 즉 주무스야다 딘데체네 딱 한다 탑시 망고식 도스나브레 So
the father, therefore, then Suddhodana, the king, he basically provided the Siddhartha with like different wives and so forth. So basically, provided him with a lot of things.
And 대신도 예비야, 다세 슈누 튼루그 텔이야, 강의 윤격이 미 배는 네버레, 다는 신기 위보레, and 강의 윤격이 미드제 그는 마당 붙이네. 딱 한제 상기 슈누튼루 투드베 딱 한제 강의기 초로 만져야게 생긴나로리아 셈먹이버스네자 동의기 초로 만져야게 탑시다 남반나서 붙여버렸어.
Likewise, what the king did was he made an effort to not expose his son to any suffering, that is, to any situation such as seeing a sick person or seeing a poor person. So the Siddhartha was totally isolated from situations, from people such as sick people, etc., so that Siddhartha would not be exposed to any problem, to any difficulty, to any suffering, to keep him happy.
안테네 콜로니스타 고스보다 다도 쇼브라 다 디게 안에 제딜이야다 상게 포랑기 치료를 폐하려야 이압기 강고 먹고 시고 요래 슈누튼루 다 이내야 슈누튼루 치료를 폐하게 되버 먹고 싶으네 안 치료를 폐네 안 치료 폐백qab이야 미 겐고 당는 신기 미네바 안 당는 신기 미시베 풍부 안 당는 신기 지 럽도 중앙 된수 만다고 먹고 식 싱네 엔 툴이야 소화식품 쇼실레브스
나지. And so at the age of 29, the Siddhartha wanted to finally go out of the palace and get the permission to leave, which initially Suddhodana didn't grant, but then eventually he was allowed to venture out of the palace. And as part of this trip outside, these trips he was able to take outside of the palace, he encountered different people. He encountered an old person, he encountered a sick person, he encountered a corpse, someone who had died, a corpse. and he encountered a monk.
제 에네미 겐고 당신이 내봐 당신이 미시베 풍부단데서 세긴데 상계기 툴이야 준호tun도 툴이야 미순저를 심베이네야 게드레시 레샤스 당신이 미순저를 심베이네야 내나 소사이티 중요하시 레샤스 아타르 나와다 게베 타르 다 유침보이네자 게보세이네자 게보이네자 미껴보이네자 신여보이네자 매보이네자 상물로 즉 시드레시 레샤스 제베 딘레베 소화도 숙청부슈 툴 충분했어.
I see. So then, eventually, having seen all this, the Buddha realized, he developed the feeling, that is the realization that, well, having seen an old person, etc., that everyone at some point will grow old. That everyone is exposed to sickness and disease. And that eventually, no matter what standing someone has in society, whether they're rich or they're poor, whether they have an education, they're well educated and knowledgeable or not, whether they are kings or beggars, no matter who it is, they will die eventually. So a very strong feeling arose in the continuum, in the mental continuum of the Buddha.
제가 찌딜래야 갈래기압은 다는 생게 즉 표준서봐 근데를 충분히 있네 한 타르 배 즉 매버 차줘야지 뭐도배 안에 북다 아이민도 삼바 딱 한다 제 소바 롱저리 컨디지 충분히 있네야 대 탐제 양탑에 디기 직다 이 tempo 요매버 즉 레민도 삼베 툴 숙심부슈 레브스.
So therefore the Buddha came to understand that within this lifetime, no matter how excellent the conditions are, no matter how great one's life is, everyone will go out of existence. So despite all the excellent conditions, despite all the conducive faculties or the conducive circumstances one will find oneself in, it will not last, that there's no lasting happiness.
제 안티네 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 주로 나 돌이야 왜 캠을 주는다 그래서 내 주변에 인물도 스포츠 좀 주변에 안티네 냥도 이런 중앙 지식을 깨네 나 쉬우지 돌이야 소황 세주 자 나는 지금 이기나 별로 수행해야 되지 그것이 소설이 힘빵 은행이 이양 별로 소화돼
I see. And so then, having understood that in this life this life does not hold any essence, the enjoyments are not lasting, and so that there is no lasting happiness. And also because he had seen the monk, he had seen an ascetic monk. And so as a result of that, he developed this feeling that as an ascetic person, you're really someone who seeks peace and a subdued mind, and eventually that a monk is someone who sets out to find lasting, that is final happiness. And with this understanding in mind, he therefore then also gave up the householder's life and set out as a monastic, that is as a monk or as an ascetic, a wandering ascetic. That's it. And so the evening that the Buddha left to actually set out to become a monk, so he left his household, he left his royal palace. So at that time, this was the night when his wife, Yashodhara, had just given birth to their first son, Rahula. Sorry. So his first son, Rahula. And so basically they were all celebrating in the palace, they were all celebrating, and as part of the celebration everyone got drunk, and eventually they were so tired, they were drunk and they fell asleep, and that gave Siddhartha the opportunity to secretly leave the palace. That's it. So the Buddha then, having left the householder's life, having left that behind, he set out to find the best teachers, so the most famous, the most renowned teachers. The Buddha approached those to receive teachings from them. So one of those teachers of these famous masters was Alara. So he sought out this particular teacher to receive teachings, Dharma teachings from him. So basically this rishi that he was receiving teachings from, he taught him different methods to receive certain levels of well-being. However, the Buddha became aware that actually those were just temporary measures. So actually temporary measures in the sense that he was not able to totally overcome attachment and so forth. So any of these affliction, it was only a temporary state. So therefore, since it was only it was not a lasting kind of state, the Buddha was not very satisfied about this. And secondly, also, he was so quick with his learning that whatever the rishi told him, whatever he taught him, he very quickly picked up on it. So due to that, having received all the knowledge that he could receive and not being satisfied with the methods that had been presented to him, he requested the rishi, he requested his teacher to teach him something further. And in response to that, the teacher said, well, there's nothing further I can teach you. I've taught you everything that I know, and you have mastered all this. That's it. And so in that way, the Buddha, realizing that all the methods he was taught were just temporary, such that his attachment or anger could just temporarily be reduced. So there was a temporary state of some happiness, but it was unable, this kind of state he had reached, or this method, was not able to totally eliminate these afflictions and totally eliminate suffering and bring a lasting happiness. And so for that reason, having approached the rishi, and him not being able to teach him anything further, the Buddha therefore set out to find another teacher, another rishi, another master who would teach him a way to get finally out of suffering. And again, he was able to teach, he learned about other methods that were just temporary methods, but he was never able, to his great satisfaction, to find a stage or reach a stage where he could finally overcome suffering. So Siddhartha started to reflect, well, what could be a method? What could I do to bring forth lasting happiness? So then his focus went towards the body. He felt that if I undergo ascetic practices to undergo certain hardship with regard to the physical basis of the body, well, maybe that will help. And so, undergoing all these physical hardships, so he deprived his body of appropriate clothing, food, drink, and so forth, and basically engaged in these really hard ascetic practices. But then eventually he also realized that these ascetic practices didn't lead him to the goal of finally overcoming the root of suffering and achieving lasting happiness. And so he basically started reflecting upon what is really the cause of suffering, what leads me to the suffering. So starting to contemplate and reflect, he was eventually able, he engaged in a meditative absorption, he entered a meditative absorption, and through his own power he was able to come to the understanding or to the realization what the cause of suffering, what is the root of suffering, and what is the method to overcoming this foundation of suffering. And in that way, he was able to gain a final kind of realization. So the Buddha gained this final understanding and realization. In other words, he gained, that is, achieved Buddhahood. He achieved the state of a fully enlightened Buddha. And so then 7 weeks after that, he started to teach. He set out to teach others with regard to his understanding. So what he had realized, how to come to a cessation of suffering, and what is the method, what are the means to achieving such a cessation. So the Buddha was actually, he received enlightenment, that is, he fully awakened in the place of Bodh-gaya. However, he then ventured to Varanasi. He went to Varanasi to start to teach. And the reason he did so was at Varanasi were 5 ascetic students or 5 ascetic practitioners who at the time when the Buddha engaged in ascetic practices, before he was enlightened, for 6 years he engaged in he exposed his body to ascetic practices, and he had 5 kind of mates. He had 5 other ascetics who helped him, who were around him. So, and the Buddha knew that they were also setting out to find a way to overcome suffering, that their striving was the same in the sense that they wanted to reach lasting happiness and were looking for methods to reach that. And this is why he sought out these 5 ascetic comrades that he knew from the times of his ascetic practices. So with regard to those 5 ascetic comrades, the Buddha felt it was helpful for them that if he went there to teach them, it would be helpful for them because they were seeking the same as the Buddha had been seeking. So, but actually during those 6 years, what the Buddha had experienced, these ascetic practices, the Buddha actually came to realize that these are only hardships with regard to the body. They do not affect the mind as such. So depriving the body of food and drink and clothing and so forth does not really transform the mind, does not really bring forth happiness. And so he understood that it's really through the mind, the transformation of the mind, through reaching concentrative states and so forth, that was a way in which lasting happiness can be achieved. However, the five ascetic comrades, they felt the Buddha had failed because they engaged in these hardships, in these practices, and then when they realized the Buddha had left their group, they thought that he basically was a failure, his practice had degenerated. And as he was approaching them, when the Buddha arrived at Varanasi and they saw him, they were very suspicious of him. They didn't trust him because they felt he had failed in his practice. So as Siddhartha was coming closer to them, they were talking about among themselves, saying, "Oh, look, there he is. His ascetic practice has degenerated." And initially, they decided to ignore him, to not pay any attention to him. However, as he was coming closer, they realized that the Buddha was very radiant. There was something special, a radiance coming from the side of the Buddha, and he radiated out this sense of peace and having a subdued mind, being peaceful and subdued, and so therefore their interests grew towards the Buddha. So. And so, as the Buddha approached them, as he met the 5 ascetic comrades, he told them that I have found the real happiness. I found perfect happiness, and I found the final cause for achieving this happiness and eliminating that which is in the way to achieving this happiness. So I will teach you this. I will explain you this method. And so the Buddha then set out to teach the five ascetic comrades. He taught them the Four Noble Truths. Let's see. So as mentioned earlier, the Four Noble Truths are the foundation of Buddhism. They're extremely important. Okay. So in the same way as we say Four Noble Truths, using the number 4, well, therefore, because of using that, so it's actually 4 sections. The Four Noble Truths refer to 4 sections. But one can subdivide it actually into 2 sections. So those 4 can be actually categorized into 2 sections. So the first section refers to that which we don't need. It refers to suffering and the cause of suffering. This is the first section. It is that which we have to eliminate. It is that which we have to remove. It is that which causes our problems. So this refers to, therefore, the first section, which includes the suffering and the cause of suffering. Then with regard to the second section, this deals with happiness, in the sense that all of us need happiness, whether we're human or non-human. All living beings are the same in that they wish to be happy. And so here, this second section refers to lasting happiness, perfect happiness, in the sense of establishing the cause that gives rise to such lasting happiness. That is the method that leads us to achieving this lasting type of happiness. So with regard to those 4, therefore, the first is the truth of suffering. The second is the truth of the origin of suffering. The third is the truth of the cessation of suffering. And the last is the truth of the path that leads to the cessation of suffering. So you have those 4. So with regard to the first, so basically there's the truth that is it's suffering itself and its cause, which is the first section as explained earlier. So suffering and its cause. And then with regard to the latter section, the second section, you have the truth of cessation and the truth of the path. So it's that which needs to be achieved in order to perfectly, that is, completely eliminate suffering. So when we talk about these 4 points, they're described as 4 truths. So it's 4 of them, and they're called truth. And if we make the name a little longer, the description of like a longer version of that name, it's the 4 noble truth, or the 4 Arya truth. So what is the reason for calling it truth? So not just saying the first is suffering, but it's called the truth of suffering. And then the second one, instead of just calling it the origin, it is called the truth of origin. So what is the reason for adding the word truth? Naji. So the reason for saying truth is that it's saying what we really need. We have so many problems, so many difficulties, so much suffering. So this is truly the case, as in like, this is in actuality the case. This is true in reality, which is therefore why we say the truth of suffering. And that also has a cause. It has a cause. There's a cause for our problems, all our difficulties. And again, there really is a cause. There's an actuality cause. So we call it the truth of the origin. And then with respect to the fact that we can actually eliminate suffering and its causes. So there is a cessation of suffering. And again, this is truly the case. This is in accordance with reality. There really is a way to overcome suffering because there really is a path. There's a method that takes us to the elimination of suffering, which is why you say this is in actuality so, and you add the word truth. I see. So with regard to the second word, the second name that is used, so it's not just called the Four Truth, but the Four Noble Truth. So why adding the word noble, or as in Sanskrit it would be Arya? Well, the reason being that there are these noble beings who have understood these Four Noble Truths. They've understood them to be true. So those are supreme beings. They're special beings because they, through their own experience, through their personal experience, have come to a comprehension of the fact that those are in accordance with reality. So this is why they're called Four Noble Truth. So when the Buddha taught the Four Noble Truths, as he set them forth, actually the way he taught them, he taught them by way of different reasonings. So there were three reasonings that he applied in order to teach the Four Noble Truths. So he based his explanation on those three reasons. Sorry. There's also a way of presenting them by way of three levels, by way of three stages, from the point of view of the stage of the basis, from the point of view of the stage of the path, and from the point of view of the stage of the result.
규제로의 일반 견해 손을 나가다 다 규제로의 유배도 일어나다 새 처음에 무슨 나가다 다디 제스킨이 주도하고 싶은 거예요. 이제 주도서 디디에 주시게 디디에 주시게 유배도 계속
맞아요. So when studying Buddhist philosophy, it becomes very important for you to understand those three levels: the basis, the path, and the result. They're crucial for one's understanding when one studies Buddhist philosophy. And in particular, what you find in Buddhist philosophy are the different philosophical tenet systems. And each of these tenet systems has a basis, a path, and a result. So it is explained according to those three levels. And so the Buddha taught these different philosophical tenet systems in accordance with the disciples, the different students, in accordance with their mental ability, with their capacity to understand. So according to those different mental capacities, he gave those different teachings and always describing the basis, the path, and the result. So with regard to the basis, so from the point of view of a person, the objects we enjoy, which are the sense objects, so visual form, sound, smell, taste, and tangible objects. So those are basically the basis for us as living beings, as persons enjoying the sense perception or the sense object. You see, so with regard to this basis here, so the basis, the objects that we basically take to mind. So it is the sense objects, it's visual form, but it's also other objects, not just the sense objects, but also objects of our mental consciousness and potentiality and so forth. So there are all these different objects that we take to mind, these different phenomena that we apprehend. And with regard to those different phenomena, here the basis explains the way in which they abide. It explains their mode of existence. No. So basically, what is explained is a threefold category of physical objects, mental objects, and that which is neither. So this threefold category. So of the first category, physical objects, that includes the five sense objects, such as, for instance, visual form. So here, with regard to the basis, what does that refer to? In the sense like it is an object that is perceived by the eye consciousness, by our eye awareness. And moreover, it is made up of atoms. It is established from atoms and molecules and so forth. It has a color and a shape, etc. So all these are the different aspects of these different phenomena. And this is here what is referred to as the conventional level or the conventional truth. No say. So here basically what the basis deals with is all these different phenomena in the conventional reality, all these different objects that exist that we perceive. And so His Holiness the Dalai Lama, when he talks of, when he describes these objects in the Buddhist scriptures, he talks about it as Buddhist science. When this description of the basis is given, His Holiness talks of giving an explanation of Buddhist science. So with regard to, therefore, these different objects of forms, shapes, and so forth, let's take the table, for instance, which is an example of something that is a physical form. Now, on the conventional level, initially there's an explanation what makes up the table, what is the substance, so whether it's a wooden table or a metal table, from the point of view of is it a useful table or non-useful table, a beautiful or ugly one, etc. So there are all these conventional kind of characteristics and attributes which are being analyzed. So here just a scientific kind of conventional level. But then there's another level. There is a deeper level. There's a subtler, more profound level with regard to the actual existence of this particular table. So the way this table appears to us, it appears to be a concrete, independent phenomenon, able to define itself as if existing in and of itself. So, but actually, this is only its mode of appearance. There's an actual ultimate mode. There's an ultimate mode in which this table exists. And that ultimate mode addresses the ultimate truth of this particular table. So here, it's not just the conventional, which was explained earlier, but this is now the ultimate, profound way in which this table exists. So therefore, whatever exists besides the table, so not just the table, all other objects, there's this conventional level and then there's this ultimate level, this deeper kind of level with regard to the actual mode of existence of any phenomenon. And this then goes into the philosophical view, into the philosophical view of Buddhism with regard to the ultimate nature of phenomena. So then that takes us to the next of the three levels, basis, path, and result. It takes us to the path. So having understood the basis, the explanation of the basic level, the conventional and the ultimate, then we look at the different afflictive emotions, the negative emotions, such as desire, aversion, and so forth. So those particular mental states, negative states of mind, always have a basis. There's always a basis based on which they arise.
먼저 이 모여이 내나 최근에 시니는 되기도 하듯이 강연이 시시는 시간이 필요해. 이 일단 시 내나 야무시 시내는 부절내는 시험을 시내는 사토거든. 야무시 시내 한 먼저 이 강연이 매우 공부시는 표도 매우 소고요. 이 일단 이 소량 털어내서 그리고
That's it. So then in reality, so if that is the case, that our afflictive, our harmful emotions arise based on these bases, on these basic objects, it becomes important, it becomes crucial to understand how they exist on a conventional level and how they also exist on an ultimate level. For then, when this understanding has been reached, then if the basis is understood correctly, then these problematic emotions such as desire and anger and so forth, they can no longer arise. They can no longer arise. So therefore, this is the method to overcoming these negative states of mind, the method which then is described as the next stage, the path. So Rinpoche is asking, do you understand what I'm saying? Is this clear, what I'm explaining? Does that make sense to some degree, or is it clear? Who is it? Please tell Rinpoche, of 100%, how many percentage do you understand? 50%? Is it 100%? 70, 20? How much do you? Please tell Rinpoche how much it is.
100+10.
100.
나한테 저는 아니들 제 막샷 이 한가고 시작을 해주신 어느 동네 목표는 이게 줘야 터는 엔 라미 막샷 엔 털도 이게 양하고 우리가 지금 뭐로 인기션 때문에 선거가 터도 제국도 제비 막샷
맞아요. So therefore, having understood the presentation of the basis, having understood how phenomena really exist, and then by way of the method, by way of the path, being able to overcome, that is to cease suffering, then you have the resultant state, which is the last stage, the last level, the resultant stage of lasting happiness. So that refers to the result. So these three, basis, path, and result, are extremely extensive in the Buddhist teachings, very extensively explained. And in other spiritual systems, you don't find that kind of explanation. So this is, in actuality, this is truly the case, that you don't find such an extensive explanation of those three aspects. So the Buddha initially, he taught, he said, this is the truth of suffering. This is the truth, this is the noble truth of suffering. This is the noble truth of the origin. This is the noble truth of the cessation. And this is the noble truth of the path. So expressing it in these words, the Buddha basically described the basis. By way of expressing it this way, he described, of those three levels, he described the basis. Narila. So this first level is like an introduction to the basis, in the sense of introducing those four noble truths. Then the next level would be what to do with those four noble truths. What are the methods, how to apply these four noble truths? That is explained during the second level.
얘네 군중 빠워차 눈이 유디 빵 얘네 고방을 차 눈이 눈이 유는 체 고베 누가 되지 그 양쳐 이제 고베 누가 되냐 람 공네 람 때문에 프로블럼 람 때문에 제 빌리가 무슨 하려고 람데
That's it. So then the second level, therefore, with regard to the method, or with regard to the path, the Buddha explained that the noble truth of suffering needs to be understood. So here the Buddha is saying all the different levels of suffering, of misery, they need to be comprehended, they need to be fully understood. Then with the second level, the Buddha said, the truth of the origin of suffering, the noble truth of the origin of suffering needs to be eliminated. So eliminating the origin, eliminating the cause of suffering, that is what needs to be done with regard to the second truth. With regard to the third truth, this needs to be, so the noble truth of cessation needs to be actualized. In that one needs to actualize the cessation. By eliminating the cause of suffering, one needs to actualize the cessation of suffering, the elimination of suffering. And then lastly, the way one brings this about is by way of meditating on the path. So the Buddha therefore said, the truth, the noble truth of the path is to be meditated on. So one needs to meditate, one needs to familiarize oneself with the methods to overcoming the cause of suffering and therefore suffering. Nari. Nari. So then with regard to the third level, this third stage, when the Buddha explained the third level of the Four Noble Truths, he was basically, so this is the most profound level. This is slightly difficult to actually explain. But basically what he said, early on he said, the truth of suffering is to be known. But then he says, the truth of suffering is to be known until there's nothing to be known. Or the truth of origin is to be eliminated and until there's nothing to be eliminated. So basically here, what the Buddha is saying here, he's saying that you need to know it really well, as in like know it perfectly, have a perfect understanding of the truth of suffering. And with regard to the elimination, completely eliminate the causes of suffering. So to totally and utterly eliminate the causes of suffering. That's what we need to do with regard to the second truth. With regard to the third truth, we need to reach the final cessation, the ultimate final cessation of suffering by following the ultimate, the final path. So this is taking it to the third level or the third stage with regard to those four truths. Therefore, with regard to those truths, what does the Buddha advise us? How does he instruct us? The Buddha says the truth of suffering is to be known. This is what we need to do with the first truth. It needs to be understood or known. Okay. So actually, with regard to the Four Noble Truths, how we should understand them, how we should get an understanding of them, there you have a text by someone called Maitreya, who composed a text which is called Sublime Continuum in English, or Uttara Tantra in Sanskrit. So this text gives you an understanding. It helps you to really comprehend, by way of an analogy, those, or through a kind of reasoning, understand those 4 points, those 4 truths. So what Maitreya does, he explains the Four Noble Truths, he sets them forth by way of an analogy, by way of an example or an analogy. Naji. So here, the first analogy, the first example, is the truth of suffering is compared to a disease. So first of all, what we first need to do, we need to identify a disease. We need to, if we're sick, we need to identify the sickness. So whether it's a belly ache or any other kind of problem we have, we need to identify it. So in terms of the analogy, it's disease. Then in terms of the actual thing that is to be explained here, so when we're again and again unhappy, again and again we face unhappy states of mind, we need to analyze those. We need to identify those. It's important to understand, that is to identify them. So if Right. Right. So with regard to a disease or any kind of problem, when we look at the symptoms of a disease, take for instance, you have water in your legs, water collects in your feet, or you feel constantly tired. All these are different symptoms. And now it's important to actually analyze, to check what is the cause, where does that come from? What kind of disease is responsible for these particular symptoms? So for instance, water collecting in your feet or feeling tired, those are symptoms that are indicative of different diseases. So it's important to find out what is the actual disease that gave rise to this particular symptom. Noted. So basically, it's important with all these different symptoms one experiences to identify what is the sickness, because once you know what the actual disease is, you can start treatment. So it's important, therefore, with regard to the symptoms, what do they refer to? What is the actual disease? And so if it's liver cancer, for instance, or another kind of disease, you can then start treatment. So likewise, we have so many problems, we have so many difficulties, and so much misery, basically. So there are all these problems. We need to identify what is that disease, what is that actually that causes those problems and difficulties.
디는 그래서 동해 시험을 차 소리는 거가 동해 시주디 리버스미 던지시게.
Rimpasum. Kasum. Sorry. So, therefore, with regard to suffering here, when it says suffering needs to be understood, suffering here needs to be understood. There are actually 3 types that are described. 3 types of sufferings are explained.
일반 방법이 동해이 된바 가서 동해이 동해 이것이 묘의 동해 수번이 켜보듯이 동해 숨이 동해
네.
동해이 동해나 묘의 동해 켜보듯이 숨이 생기는 동해 시험을 시험을 또 동해 방법은 이것이 말에 수번이 계신 것이 또 동해 시험을 이내 대단 제니
Yes. So with regard to those 4 types of suffering that the Buddha describes, he describes the suffering of change, and pervasive conditioned suffering. So here, of those 3, when the Buddha says suffering should be understood or should be known, he actually refers to the 3rd type. What really needs to be understood is pervasive conditioned suffering. And the other 2 are basically explained in connection to the 3rd type. So they're explained in connection to that. But what really needs to be understood is the 3rd type. No, say. No, say. So with regard to the 3rd type of suffering, pervasive conditioned suffering, this type of suffering is only identified by the Buddha. It's unique to Buddhism because no other spiritual system has identified it. Versus the first 2, the suffering and suffering of change, they're also explained in the Buddhist context, however, they're not unique to Buddhism. So what is the first type referred to when we say the suffering of suffering? Well, it's what we ordinarily identify as being unpleasant. So any kind of unpleasant experience, any kind of experience that we do not like, that we find unpleasant, that is described as suffering of suffering. So as an example of the suffering of suffering, so like an unpleasant experience, is the unpleasant feeling of being hungry, of being thirsty, of feeling tired, of feeling sick, not liking your job, not liking your work, not getting along with others. So all those are examples of a suffering of suffering, an unpleasant experience, an unpleasant feeling. It's called the suffering of suffering. Yes. So with regard to this first type, it's not just in Buddhism that it's said it needs to be, that there's the explanation that it needs to be overcome. Also in other spiritual systems, it is explained as something that needs to be overcome, that needs to be removed. And also on top of that, everyone wants to remove it. Everyone makes an effort to remove the first type of suffering. It is in general identify as something undesirable, not just by human beings, but also by animals. So when a dog, for instance, experiences the suffering of thirst, as in like suffering from thirst or hunger, it goes out of its way to find food, to find drink. Likewise with a cow, when a cow is hungry, it goes out to find grass. So it's making an effort to remove that type of suffering. So that first type of suffering, that suffering of suffering, whether you're non-Buddhist, like a non-Buddhist spiritual system or Buddhist system, whether you're human or not a human, all in commonly want to overcome, have a feeling of wanting to overcome this type of suffering, want to remove it and see it as something that needs to be overcome. But in general, this is all we're actually making an effort to overcome. This is how far we go. So we don't go further. We try to just remove that type of suffering and leave it at that. We do not go not further to remove any further suffering. I see. So then the second type of suffering is described as the suffering of change. So the suffering of change is a type of suffering that needing to be eliminated. The fact that it needs to be eliminated is not unique to the Buddhist scriptures. So, for instance, in the Hindu scriptures, in the traditional Indian Hindu scriptures, they do describe that as a type of suffering which needs to be eliminated, and they prescribe several different means and methods to overcoming that particular type of suffering. So what is this suffering of change? We need to recognize what that suffering of change refers to. But actually many of us are not able to understand that the suffering of change is an actual suffering. It does not occur to us. We are not aware of that being actually a type of suffering. See. So actually, with regard to the suffering of change, we are all looking for happiness. We're all seeking happiness. So we're seeking a type of happiness that is described as contaminated, a tainted type of happiness. So it refers to a type of happiness wanting to have wealth, or the happiness we associate with being wealthy, the happiness we associate with having a reputation and fame and so forth. So actually, we work extremely hard to get that type of happiness, which is actually described to be a suffering of change. It's a type of suffering in actuality that we run after and try to achieve. I see.
디기 대다 깨는 디기 대를 말이야. 디기 대다기 냠도 가라서 먹기로 찍다. 냠도 가라서 동해지 제일. 그러니까 내가 동해이네요. 그러니까 내가 비이네요. 동해이를 신은 대로.
You see. So this type of suffering, it's actually, we're not saying this is not a temporary type of happiness. We are not saying this is not a temporary happiness, but it actually is it is only just that. It is only temporary. It just gives us a temporary sense of well-being. However, it's a changing type of happiness in the sense it's a type of suffering in terms of the fact that it changes. It gives us problems. So this type of temporary happiness leads to problems. It doesn't remain. It does not remain the same. It will not last. And it gives rise, that is, it induces all types of problems. Which is why it is actually something we need to overcome. We need to overcome that type of suffering of change because it is in the nature of suffering. It is actually in the nature of suffering. That's it. That's it. That's it. To give you an example of that particular type of suffering, take for instance you have a wound, you cut yourself and you have a wound. So when the wound is aching, when it's burning, it's aching, that is like the suffering of suffering. But if temporarily the wound, you start scratching it and there's a temporary relief, you start scratching or rubbing it and there's a temporary relief from the ache, that is a truth of change, a suffering of change. That temporary relief from the aching is described as a suffering of change. So actually, when we rub this or we scratch this, there's a temporary relief from the actual suffering. But what actually happens? What actually happens when you just scratch or rub it? Nasce. Laje. Nasce. So think about what happens when you lick or when you rub or scratch a wound. So actually, does it really get better? Or what happens? So for instance, if you watch a dog that has a wound, so the dog starts licking, it starts scratching and rubbing and so forth. So what we usually do, we put a collar around the neck of the dog so the dog is unable to scratch, that is, reach the wound. Why? Because when that happens, though there's a temporary relief from the suffering itself, but it's only temporary and it makes things worse. The problem gets greater. And so this is not just true for dogs, this is true for all living beings. Us being a living being like a dog, this is also true for us. Sì, sì. And so with regard to our own personal internal feeling, we don't identify the suffering of change as a type of suffering. We don't see that in reality it's in the nature of suffering, but rather we seek this type of experience. We seek out all the time, not really identifying it correctly.
숙제고 싶어하는데 대를 내는 직생만으로야 소화되어지게.
Nare. So let's take the example, we see a beautiful object, we see an attractive object. By seeing this pleasant object, there is a type of happiness, some kind of pleasant feeling that arises.
이내야 숙제부터 통하니 소화되게 열지는 숙제부터 아빠 통하면 대인 통, 생인 통, 나 통치는 같이.
But if we see this pleasant form again and again and again, today and tomorrow, the day after, what happens?
가슴에는 묘미고 아까 통해도 이 자신차 하는데 묘미고.
Nare. What happens is we get bored. We see it again and again and again, and at some point we simply get bored. This pleasant feeling no longer arises. Nase. So the same is true, so not just for visual objects, but also for sounds. So take a song, for instance. A song, you listen to it for the first time, and it gives you a pleasant feeling. It makes you happy. But if you keep listening to the same song all day long, day by day, eventually you grow bored, right? That's it. So actually it's the same song. You listen to the same song, it's the same visual object that you keep seeing. But what happens is that your emotional response, your feeling towards it, it changes. So therefore it changes such that the initial sense of happiness and pleasure, it slowly turns into boredom. It turns into something negative. So it doesn't last, which is, therefore it's the suffering of change. So this is true for all things, food, clothing, same reaction. Nasi. Nasi. So likewise with regard to a house, initially you have a big, beautiful house and you feel very happy staying in that house, living in that house. But then at some point problems arise. Before long, this feeling of happiness will not be there. But instead you start bringing up all these things like there's this problem, there's that problem, it's too big, it's too small, it's too expensive, and so forth. So before long, this pleasant feeling is no longer there, but instead it changes. And the same is true for a car, for instance. Your feeling towards it will change. So actually it's a suffering of change. Although we have a sense, if I get that, I'd really be happy. There's a sense in our mind, if I have this, I'd really be happy. I'll be lastingly happy. But actually, once we have it, once we get the object we wish to have, then it will change. It will not remain the same. So we can know from this that it doesn't provide us with that lasting and ultimate type of happiness. because it's actually in the nature of suffering. So if we continue with this particular object that initially gives us pleasure, if we keep just with this object, eventually it will lead to countless different problems, feeling bored and so forth. So countless different problems. So it is not real happiness. So then, Rinpoche will go to the next kind of suffering, pervasive conditioned suffering, the third type. No, see. So when the Buddha says suffering needs to be understood well, perfectly, he actually refers to the third type of suffering, pervasive conditioned suffering. So identifying this type of suffering, this is unique to the Buddhist spiritual system. I see. So what does it actually refer to? What do we mean with this last type of suffering? It refers to our present body, which is the result of afflictive emotions and karmic actions. So having this particular aggregate, having this physical basis, which is actually the result, which has arisen from afflictive emotions, negative emotions, as well as karmic actions. So this body, which is actually arisen from karma and negative emotions, this body as a basis gives us so much trouble. It is the cause for so many problems and so much misery. 나지. 나지라. 나지. So taking again the example that we used early on of the wound. So actually we only identify the wound as something negative, as something undesirable, as long as it hurts us, as long as it itches, etc. So those times we actually see it as something negative. And when it doesn't give us any trouble, we don't feel like it's troublesome, but actually it's a wound, it's something that's not supposed to be there. So likewise with cancer, if you have cancer, for instance, so as long as you don't notice the symptoms, at that time you're actually feeling it's all right. But it is cancer. In the end, it is cancer. It's something that's going to give you trouble. And we only identify it properly then when we have symptoms such as our feet hurt or our belly hurts, etc. So likewise here, but actually is cancer, is potentially very dangerous. So likewise with our body being the result of karma and afflictions, it actually is the basis for suffering. It serves as the base, which then gives rise to all sorts of problems. So this is why we have to overcome this particular body, this particular basis, which is actually just giving rise to so many problems. This is a foundation for difficulties, and therefore it needs to be overcome. We need to understand it, thus, to be a suffering, a pervasive condition suffering, and identify it as such suffering, as something that needs to be overcome. No, sí. 맞아요. 라질라. Sì. No, see. So with regard to a sickness, we know that when there's a sickness, when there's pain, when there's cancer, we know this is something actually harmful. So we also know it's important to overcome this, because sooner or later it will give us all this trouble. So we make an effort to overcome it. But we're a little bit like, our situation right now is we're like someone who has cancer, but we only pay attention to the symptoms. So we're okay. When the symptoms are no longer obvious, that's when we can bear it. We're able to just bear it. We just stay with it. But in actuality, right now, we have the basis of suffering. It's like a cancer. It's like a disease that lies dormant there. And without removing that, we will not be able to remove our other sufferings. So we only concern ourselves with the superficial types of sufferings, the suffering of suffering. That's what we're only concerned with. But we don't understand that the basis for all these sufferings, that this is what creates, it's like the cancer, that this is responsible for it. So we need to identify that kind of basis and not just concern ourselves with the superficial symptoms that this basis actually gives rise to. Yes, sir. Okay. So, Rinpoche is saying that time is up now for this first session. Now we have time for one question. If you have a question, we have only time for one question, and then we get together again. Well, you make an announcement.
So, if anybody has any questions, just raise your hand. I'll come to you with the mic.
Oh, if there is no question, then that's good.